You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, we've got some news today, and that is in the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington, D.C., which is the office that you worked out of as a prosecutor for decades. We're seeing Ed Martin, who is the interim U.S. Attorney, leaving his post, which is objectively good news for anybody who cares about democracy and the rule of law. But we're seeing Judge Jeanine come in and take over for him, and she'll be able to serve as the interim U.S. Attorney for the next 120 days. And so, honest question here, as I'm trying to figure out whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, does the fact that Ed Martin is leaving supersede the fact that we have somebody like Judge Jeanine coming in? Is there some difference between the two that might suggest that Ed Martin, for example, is more dangerous than somebody like Judge Jeanine, at least on paper?
Yeah, Brian, on the one hand, I want to think it's a good thing because Ed Martin had exactly zero prosecutorial experience. So making him the top prosecutor in Washington, D.C. is about as foolish as it gets. Compounding the problem is he was abusing the power and authority of the position of the United States Attorney for the District of Columbia damn near daily. Now, the flip side is, will Jeanine Pirro be much better, right? This may be a, frying pan, welcome to fire kind of scenario. But here is the thing. Jeanine Pirro was the district attorney for Westchester County in New York for nearly a decade. I am hopeful that she has not lost all of her rule of law muscle memory, all of her prosecutorial chops and instincts in, the interim in her time as a talking head on Fox News. She was also a judge for a number of years in Westchester County. So it is hard for me to conceive of somebody who served as a district attorney, who served as a judge, completely abandoning everything that I would like to think they knew or they learned in that capacity, being a public servant, being loyal to the rule of law, showing allegiance to the United States Constitution. So I am going to be very guardedly optimistic here and say that Jeanine Pirro will be significantly better than Ed Martin. At least that is my fervent hope for the prosecutors who work at that office and for the safety of the people of the District of Columbia.
Well, look, I know that you and I make it a point not to be Pollyanna about the things that are happening. I mean, you can look at somebody like Pam Bondi, who had no shortage of prosecutorial experience. She was the Attorney General of Florida, but she's not comporting herself in a way that would suggest that she's more deferential to the law as opposed to Donald Trump. So is there some concern that just because Jeanine Pirro has more prosecutorial experience than Ed Martin doesn't necessarily suggest that she's going to be a more appropriate choice to lead the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office?
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think an apt comparison because Pam Bondi, was a prosecutor down in Florida. She was the Attorney General, I think, for 2 terms down in Florida. But I don't know, maybe they do things differently down in Florida on the rule of law front. That seems to be a fair inference given the way...
I would say so, yeah.
Given the way she has comported herself as Attorney General, being just an absolute lapdog, a mouthpiece for Donald Trump. But here's the thing. Jeanine Pirro was also a judge, and I'd like to think that you don't get to be a judge and you don't sort of sit in judgment over the cases of others, really consequential matters, criminal matters, civil matters, without even just by default or by osmosis absorbing some of the rule of law and the importance of the allegiance to the rule of law. Here is one thing I will say. Whatever Pam Bondi did in Florida, she certainly didn't learn the rules as it pertains to the role and the scope of the powers of a prosecutor, or in her instance, as an attorney general, because she's just blown through all of that. I am hopeful that Jeanine Pirro, having been a DA, having been a judge, will at least understand and appreciate that she cannot abuse the office of the United States Attorney for the District of Columbia the way Ed Martin did. I mean, for gosh sakes, Ed Martin was writing letters to universities saying it was unacceptable to him that universities were teaching and promoting DEI, that they would be investigated. Here's some breaking news, sport. You can't investigate universities for what they decide to teach because it's not a crime. And then he would ban students from those universities from ever being employed at the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office. Brian, I'm going to take a leap of faith and say Jeanine Pirro wouldn't be that insane and sort of that abusive of the powers of the office upon which she is about to enter, certainly not in the way that Ed Martin was.
Unfortunately, we're going to have the opportunity to see whether or not that plays itself out. And look, I think for everybody watching, I want to make it clear that I don't think that Glenn is just saying he hopes and thinks Judge Jeanine is going to be a good U.S. attorney for in D.C., that it's just relative to what we have right now, which the sad reality is that we do have to judge things relative to what we have right now. And the question really at the heart of this is, how is she going to compare to Ed Martin? Because this is what we're left with. Unfortunately, in the Trump administration, we don't have good options. It's not like Donald Trump is going to all of a sudden appoint Janet Yellen to oversee the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington, D.C., or Merrick Garland or somebody like that. He is going to pick from a pool of people who are only there because they're willing to some degree, rubber stamp his policies or serve as rubber stamps for his policies. And so the hope here is that she will not be as overtly corrupt as Ed Martin. And I think at this point, you take what wins you can get, knowing full well that it's never going to be anything close to a home run.
Yeah, Brian, and a couple of points of light here. Let's not downplay the fact that senators stood up to Donald Trump and said, Ed Martin, no, we will not support him. And Trump was forced to withdraw that nomination. Every time we see Senate Republicans push back on Donald Trump, I happen to believe it's an important indication that it will be easier moving forward for them to stand up to Donald Trump than harder, because they've done it a couple of times now. And here's the other point of light. Listen, Jeanine Pirro still has to be confirmed. Now, I think we all suspect she will be, but you know what we will probably now be regaled with over the next, several weeks is, everything that Jeanine Pirro said on Fox or elsewhere that was unhinged, that was part of a conspiracy theory, that was, nothing but the same old garbage that Trump and company spew into the public square. So let's see. I mean, her confirmation is not a lock, even though I think most betting people would say, you know what? The Senate Republicans stood up to Donald Trump once when it came to the D.C. U.S. attorney. They're probably not going to do it a second time.
Does she have to be confirmed to the actual position, or is she able to do what Ed Martin did, which is just take advantage of the 120-day interim period?
It's a great question, because I don't know precisely what the rules are governing sequential interim appointees. Because think about it. If he could get away with, a crap U.S. attorney for 120 days at a pop and could stack them up one after another after another. Heck, maybe they'd call back Matt Gaetz and put him in that position.
Right.
But I'm not sure.
You get the entire cast of the five on Fox.
Yeah, that would please don't give Trump any ideas.
Yeah, I was just going to say. Yeah.
But it's a good question, because I do think there may be some rules and some safeguards built into the process, but I'm not precisely privy to, how many interim U.S. attorneys you can stack up one after another.
And I got to ask, in terms of Ed Martin's next steps, what is he poised to do next within the Trump administration?
Well, if you thought Donald Trump was bad on the pardon front thus far, welcome the new pardon attorney for the United States of America, Ed Martin. Of course, he'll be wearing two hats. He will not only be doling out pardons to whomever Donald Trump wants to give pardons to. I can almost envision a pardon sales kiosk being set up outside Ed Martin's door. He'll probably take cash or credit cards. But he will be wearing two hats, because he'll also be heading up, wait for it, the Committee on the Weaponization of Government. So Ed Martin will be trying to destroy the legitimacy of the Department of Justice on two fronts moving forward.
Well, look, as far as we can tell, that's been Ed Martin's entire career in the Trump administration thus far, making sure to destroy the legitimacy of the government from the inside. Is there any concern that, look, it's not like Trump had any issue ordering these pardons, and so at this point, this is just a cushy ride out the rest of his time in government gig on the taxpayer's dime for Ed Martin, is it not? Because it's not like Donald Trump was facing any headwinds in terms of pardoning who he wanted to pardon, given the fact that this is somebody who pardoned 1,600 insurrectionists on day one.
Well, he faced a little bit of headwind, because the pardon attorney for the United States previously was a woman named Liz Oyer, and she had the temerity to refuse to agree that Mel Gibson should have his gun rights restored after he was a convicted domestic violence offender. So Liz Oyer refused Donald Trump's dirty ask, and she was promptly and summarily terminated. So, he has kind of cleared the runway a little bit for whatever insane pardons, whatever, improper, unjust pardons he wants to just, push right through Ed Martin's office.
All right, and finally, Glenn, this is a question that's probably going to hit you close to home, again, given your decades of service at the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C., but do you think that the reputation of the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. survives folks like Ed Martin and Jeanine Pirro at the helm of this office?
Yeah, I do. Now, I have a real dog in the fight. That was my professional home for decades, as you say. I worked with hundreds and hundreds of prosecutors who were entirely dedicated to the mission being serving the people of the District of Columbia and by extension the United States honestly, ethically, and honorably without having politics enter into our prosecutorial decisions in any way. There are about 300 to 325 federal prosecutors in that office at any given time. We have quite a bit of attrition. A lot of people come and go through the office. But we have weathered, I would say, subpar U.S. attorneys before. Nothing like Ed Martin, or hopefully Jeanine Pirro will be better. But what I am confident of is the people, most of whom I still know who work there, are going to keep their head down. They are going to continue to, apply the law without fear or favor. They're going to do what they always do, prosecute in the best interests of the people of the District of Columbia. And Jeanine Pirro will come, but if confirmed, she will eventually go, and that office will continue to do the good, honest, honorable work of the people of D.C. So to answer your question, I absolutely believe the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia will continue to survive. Indeed, it will continue to thrive because the honor of the people who work there.
All right, well, we will leave it there. And of course, plenty to stay on top of as Judge Jeanine, and I kind of can't believe that I'm saying this in real life, but as Judge Jeanine takes over the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington, D.C., we'll have plenty to cover, and we will, of course, stay on top of any updates we get out of that office or any other offices on the legal front. So with that said, for everybody watching right now, if you'd like to follow along and to support our work more broadly, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.